There are some truths buried in the desert sand that people hope we never find. Not gold, not lost tombs, something far more dangerous. A single 4,500-year-old skeleton. It was found in a clay pot, but its DNA was a political bomb. When scientists decoded it, they didn't just find an ancestor. They found a ghost. A ghost of a lost civilization swallowed by the Sahara. A civilization whose very existence challenges everything we've been told about the origins of human genius. This isn't the story of a mummy. It's the story of why some discoveries get suppressed, and why the most important skeleton in history is the one you've never heard of. Why would a simple pot burial terrify the archaeological establishment? Picture this. Beni Hassan, 2855 BCE. The age of pyramid building is just beginning. Pharaoh Djoser is commissioning the first step pyramid. Egyptian civilization is supposedly in its pure foundational phase. Someone dies. Not a pharaoh, not a noble, just a person. They're buried with the simplest ritual imaginable, wrapped in linen, placed in a ceramic pot, covered with sand. No gold, no elaborate tomb architecture, no mummification process that would later become Egypt's trademark. For 4,500 years, this skeleton lies forgotten in the ground near what would become one of Egypt's most famous archaeological sites. Meanwhile, the entire field of Egyptology builds itself around assumptions of genetic purity and cultural isolation. Then, in the 21st century, archaeologists make a discovery that should have been impossible: intact ancient DNA stretching back to the dawn of Egyptian civilization. Here's what makes this skeleton dangerous to established narratives. It predates the mummy-making process by centuries. No resins to contaminate the genetic material, no natron to destroy the cellular structure, no elaborate preservation techniques that could muddy the scientific waters with foreign substances. Just pure, unfiltered genetic truth. From Egypt's foundational period, the coverage was low, roughly 2 times genome depth, but sufficient for broad ancestry analysis. When the results came back, several researchers initially refused to publish them. Too controversial, too politically sensitive, too destructive to decades of established academic doctrine. Because this wasn't just any skeleton. This was patient zero of a mystery that reaches into the heart of human migration patterns, ancient politics, and modern academic censorship. But before we reveal what that DNA contained, you need to understand the propaganda war that's been raging in academic circles for over a century. What happens when scientific discovery threatens national identity? The headlines screamed, "Ancient Egyptian genome decoded." The implications seemed clear. Egypt's origins finally revealed through cutting-edge science. Museums prepared new exhibitions. Textbook publishers started planning revisions. Egyptian authorities celebrated vindication of their cultural narrative. Then the actual data emerged, and everything fell apart. The autosomal ancestry, the genetic blueprint from all ancestors, showed majority Middle Neolithic North African markers. So far, so expected. But scattered throughout were substantial minority signatures from the Neolithic Fertile Crescent and significant traces of Levantine influence. More disturbing to traditional narratives, the lineage markers revealed Y-DNA E1, B1b on the paternal line, mtDNA N1, A1b2 on the maternal side. These weren't random genetic accidents. They were breadcrumbs leading back to a story of ancient migration that spans continents and challenges every assumption about how civilizations form. Isotope analysis confirmed this person grew up locally along the Nile, eating an agrarian diet, working as a skilled craftsman. But their genetic signature told a completely different story, one of ancestral journeys across vast distances, of populations mixing and merging in ways that demolished the neat categories beloved by nationalist historians. Here's where the media manipulation began. They compressed Near Eastern ancestry into non-African, deliberately ignoring the fundamental reality that North Africa and the Near East have been genetically connected for tens of thousands of years. One person became all Egypt. One cemetery became all eras. One time period became 3,000 years of history. The nuance got buried under politically motivated oversimplification. Egyptian authorities quietly pressured journals to soften their language. Western academics found their research funding mysteriously reduced if they pushed too hard on uncomfortable implications. The skeleton that should have revolutionized our understanding of ancient civilizations instead became a case study in how politics corrupts science. But the genetic evidence was undeniable, and it pointed towards something that would shake archaeology to its foundations. Who were the Neolithic North Africans, and why is finding them considered dangerous? Deep in the genetic analysis, researchers detected something that defied explanation: a massive ancestral component they cautiously labeled Neolithic North African. The problem? This population exists only as a genetic ghost haunting modern DNA analysis. Think about the implications. The largest genetic component in ancient Egyptian DNA, often comprising 60 to 70% of the total ancestry, comes from people we've never actually found. We have fragments, partial genomes from Ibero-Maurusian sites like Pharaohs, dating back 15,000 years, incomplete sequences from Neolithic Morocco. But the main ancestral stream that fed into ancient Egypt remains scientifically invisible, archaeologically absent, and politically inconvenient. Here's why this ghost population terrifies certain academic circles. When the Sahara was green from roughly 11,000 to 5,000 years ago, it supported massive, sophisticated populations across North Africa. Lake Megachad covered an area larger than the modern Caspian Sea. Rivers flowed where today there's only sand. Complex societies developed advanced technologies, trade networks, and cultural systems that we're only beginning to understand. Recent satellite archaeology has revealed thousands of settlements, ceremonial sites, and urban centers buried under Saharan sand. Ground-penetrating radar shows massive stone constructions. Genetic modeling suggests populations in the millions. Then came the desiccation event. As the Sahara dried up over several millennia, these ghost populations faced an impossible choice: death in the expanding desert, or migration toward the only permanent water source in the region, the Nile. The genetic models can infer their presence through statistical analysis, but their actual remains are buried under miles of sand, lost to climate change, or deliberately excluded from research due to political sensitivities around African technological sophistication. They're the missing piece in humanity's puzzle, a sophisticated North African civilization that vanished so completely we can only detect them through their genetic legacy in later populations. But here's where the conspiracy gets deeper. Some researchers believe we have found them. Major Saharan archaeological sites with clear evidence of advanced pre-Saharan civilizations exist, but the findings are either classified, unpublished, or actively suppressed because they challenge too many established narratives about African capabilities and European technological supremacy. The ghost ancestors aren't just genetically invisible, they've been made politically invisible, which brings us to an even more controversial question. Why are scientists afraid to discuss what ancient Egyptians actually looked like? This is where science collides head-on with the most explosive debates in modern archaeology. For over a century, arguments about ancient Egyptian appearance have been driven more by racial politics than by evidence. The DNA offers definitive answers, but they're answers that make everyone uncomfortable. Here's the uncomfortable scientific truth that researchers whisper in private but rarely publish. Predicting appearance from ancient DNA reveals that ancient Egyptians displayed the full range of human pigmentation variation. Some individuals carried genetic markers associated with lighter pigmentation. Others carried markers associated with darker pigmentation. Most fell somewhere in between. The skeletal morphology follows Allen's rule limb proportions, adapted to hot, arid climates. But populations overlap significantly in these measurements. The cranial features suggest regional Mediterranean variation rather than any modern racial category. Every artistic reconstruction you see in museums represents political choices, not scientific conclusions. The same skull can be rendered to look completely different depending on the artist's assumptions about soft tissue depth, hair texture, and pigmentation patterns. But here's what really terrifies institutions. The genetic evidence suggests that ancient Egyptian appearance was probably more varied than modern Egyptian appearance. The population was genetically more diverse 4,000 years ago than it is today. This threatens nationalist narratives on multiple sides. Egyptian nationalists who want to claim pure African heritage, European scholars who've spent careers arguing for Mediterranean connections, Sub-Saharan African scholars who see ancient Egypt as validation of Black African achievement. The truth is more complex and more interesting than any of these political positions. Ancient Egypt was genuinely cosmopolitan, a melting pot of human diversity that created something unprecedented in world history. But the appearance debate is just a distraction from the real revelation hidden in the genetic data. What if everything we know about how civilizations form is wrong? The genetic evidence reveals ancient Egypt not as the product of one people, but as a convergence zone, a place where 4 distinct ancestral streams merged to create something unprecedented in human history. Stream 1. The ancient North African ghost populations we've discussed. These were the foundational inhabitants carrying genetic signatures that stretch back to when the Sahara was green. Their DNA forms the majority component in most ancient Egyptian genomes, but they remain archaeologically invisible due to climate change, and some argue, deliberate academic neglect. Stream 2. Near Eastern and Anatolian farmers flowing down through the Levant. They brought revolutionary agricultural technologies, domesticated wheat, barley, cattle, and sheep that made permanent large-scale settlements possible. Their genetic signature appears as Neolithic Fertile Crescent ancestry, often comprising 20 to 30% of ancient Egyptian genomes. Stream 3. Northeast African populations moving up from Nubia, the broader Sahel region, and the Ethiopian highlands. These connections would later formalize into the Kingdom of Kush, but the genetic links stretch back to Egypt's earliest dynasties. This stream intensifies during certain historical periods, particularly during the 25th dynasty when Kushite pharaohs ruled Egypt. Stream 4. Mediterranean influences that arrived in waves during different historical periods. Minoan traders, Greek colonists, Roman administrators, and eventually Arab conquerors. Each wave added new genetic layers to Egypt's increasingly complex mosaic. Our pot burial skeleton captures Egypt at the critical convergence moment. After streams 1 and 2 had thoroughly mixed, during the initial contact with stream 3, and before stream 4 reached significant intensity. But here's the revolutionary discovery that changes everything we thought we knew about civilization formation. This wasn't gradual mixing over millennia. The genetic evidence suggests rapid convergence during specific historical windows, catastrophic events that forced populations together and created explosive cultural innovation. The traditional model of civilization isolated populations, slowly developing complex societies, is completely wrong. Great civilizations emerge from diversity, from mixing, from the creative tension that happens when different peoples, technologies, and ideas collide. Egypt became great, not despite genetic and cultural mixing, but because of it, which raises the most provocative question in archaeology today. Egypt's genetic history isn't a smooth blend. It's a series of dramatic remixes, triggered by climate catastrophes, political upheavals, and economic opportunities. Each remix event created what geneticists call admixture windows, historical moments when normal population boundaries collapsed and new genetic combinations emerged. The African humid period collapse around 5,000 years ago didn't just dry up the Sahara, it created the world's first refugee crisis on an unimaginable scale. Satellite archaeology suggests millions of people were forced to abandon sophisticated Saharan civilizations and funnel into the Nile Valley within just a few centuries. This wasn't gradual migration. It was demographic concentration that created the population density necessary for complex state formation. The genetic mixing that occurred during this period laid the foundation for pharaonic civilization. The 4.2 kiloyear event hit like a civilizational reset button. Droughts across the eastern Mediterranean destabilized the Old Kingdom, collapsed trade networks, and triggered massive population movements. Genetic analysis of burials from this period shows dramatic ancestry shifts, new populations arriving, existing populations relocating, genetic boundaries dissolving. But the most fascinating remix events were the systematic opportunities created by political and economic changes. The Hyksos period, 1650 to 1550 BCE, transformed Avaris into a cosmopolitan trading hub, where genetic streams from across the eastern Mediterranean converged. Recent DNA analysis of Hyksos period burials reveals ancestry proportions unlike anything seen before or since in Egyptian history. The Kushite, 25th dynasty, 747 to 656 BCE, formalized south-to-north connections that had existed for millennia, but also intensified them dramatically. Genetic evidence shows this wasn't just political conquest, it was demographic integration on a massive scale. Ptolemaic Alexandria, 332 to 30 BCE, became the ultimate genetic mixing bowl, combining Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Jewish, and Arab populations in proportions that created entirely new ancestry combinations. Each event created temporary genetic chaos, followed by new stable combinations. The pattern repeats throughout Egyptian history. Catastrophe creates opportunity, opportunity enables mixing, mixing generates innovation. But here's the most controversial implication. This pattern isn't unique to Egypt. Every great civilization in human history shows the same genetic signature: periods of intense mixing, followed by explosive cultural development. Rome during the Punic Wars, Tang Dynasty China during the Silk Road expansion, the Islamic Golden Age during the Abbasid expansion, the European Renaissance during the Age of Exploration. Genetic diversity drives civilizational success. Homogeneity leads to stagnation and decline. Which brings us to the final, most important question. So what does the forbidden DNA of Egypt actually tell us about civilization itself? The pot burial genome near Beni Hassan isn't just the story of one skeleton. It's the key that unlocks the greatest secret in human history: how civilizations actually form and why they succeed or fail. The skeleton they analyzed wasn't misread because scientists got the genetics wrong. It was misread because we've been asking the wrong questions for over a century. Race is not just the wrong lens. It's a deliberately misleading lens that obscures the real story. Egypt isn't the product of one pure population developing in isolation. It's a river fed by 4 ancestral streams that changed through time and space, creating complexity and capability that no single population could achieve alone. The Nile didn't create genetic isolation. It created genetic convergence on a scale unprecedented in human history. The forbidden aspect isn't the DNA itself, it's what the DNA reveals about the fundamental nature of human achievement. Great civilizations don't emerge from racial purity or cultural isolation. They emerge from diversity, from mixing, from the creative tension generated when different peoples, technologies, and worldviews collide and combine. Ancient Egypt was cosmopolitan from its very beginning. The pot burial proves that even in 2855 BCE, during supposedly pure foundational periods, Egyptian DNA already carried genetic signatures from across North Africa, the Near East, and beyond. The mummy they misread wasn't genetically pure. It was genetically sophisticated, the product of thousands of years of human migration, mixing, and cultural synthesis that created the world's first truly great civilization. Every great civilization in human history emerged the same way. Not from purity, but from the creative power of diversity carefully managed and integrated over time. But here's what makes this discovery truly explosive. If genetic diversity creates civilizational success, what does that mean for modern societies trying to restrict immigration, promote ethnic purity, or maintain cultural isolation? The DNA of ancient Egypt isn't just rewriting history, it's predicting the future. Societies that embrace diversity and managed mixing will thrive. Societies that retreat into homogeneity will stagnate and decline. This isn't political correctness. This is evolutionary biology. This is archaeological fact. This is the genetic blueprint for human success, written in 4,500-year-old bones. Right now, as you watch this video, similar genetic mixing is happening in cities around the world. The next great civilization might be forming in New York, London, Dubai, or Singapore, anywhere diverse populations are converging and creating new combinations of human potential. But you won't hear this story in mainstream academia. Too politically dangerous, too threatening to established power structures, too revolutionary for comfortable narratives. If you want to understand the real forces shaping human civilization past, present, and future, you need to dig deeper than what they're telling you in schools and museums. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because we're just getting started. Drop a comment below. What other pure civilizations do you think are actually genetic melting pots? The evidence might shock you. And if this video opened your eyes to how much official history is hiding, share it with someone who needs to see the truth. Because the forbidden DNA of Egypt is just the beginning.